Universal Pictures isn't just a movie studio, it's basically the history of Hollywood rolled into one. Born way back in 1912, it survived scandals, near bankruptcy, monster movies, dinosaurs, and Vin Diesel. This is the place that gave us Dracula, Frankenstein, E.T., Jurassic Park, and the Fast and Furious family. But the story behind the movies is even weirder than the films themselves. Nepotism? Check studio zoos? Check wild gambles that somehow changed the industry? Double check. Buckle up, because we're diving into 20 facts about Universal Pictures that will blow your mind. Carl Laemmle was a German immigrant who went from running clothing stores in Wisconsin to building one of the biggest studios in Hollywood. In 1912, he founded Universal Film Manufacturing Company by merging a bunch of smaller outfits. Laemmle wasn't just about movies, he basically invented the movie star system. Back then, studios kept actors anonymous, but Laemmle started plastering Florence Lawrence's name everywhere, turning her into America's first movie star. This simple trick made audiences obsessed with actors, not just films, and every studio copied him. The guy literally shaped Hollywood marketing. Universal quickly grew into a powerhouse, snapping up land in California to build a movie-making empire. Not bad for a man who started out in a clothing shop. It's one of those classic only-in-America stories. An immigrant shows up, hustles, and ends up creating a studio that would outlive him by more than a century. Most studios build sound stages. Carl Laemmle built an entire city. In 1915, Universal City officially opened, complete with a post office, fire station, ranch land, and even a zoo. It was billed as the only movie town in the world. Tourists could buy tickets, ride the trolley, and watch films being made right in front of them. Imagine going to the movies and actually seeing actors filming a cowboy shootout in the distance. Laemmle wanted Universal City to be not just a workplace, but a destination where fans could peek behind the curtain. Universal City grew so large that it became its own incorporated place in Los Angeles. Today, it's still there, though now it's half movie lot, half theme park, and still a major tourist draw. Basically, Laemmle turned movie-making into a spectator sport. Before reality TV, Universal City was where you watched movie magic live. Before caped vampires and time-traveling DeLoreans, Universal had a marketing revolution. In 1910-12, Carl Laemmle poached actress Florence Lawrence from Biograph for his independent moving pictures, IMP, which he soon merged into Universal. Studios kept actors anonymous back then, but Laemmle blasted her name on posters and fed newspapers a, now infamous, PR stunt about her death and miraculous return. Crass? A little? Effective? Completely. Lawrence became the first widely billed movie star, and audiences started following performers, not just titles. Universal's early output also minted heartthrob King Baggett and showcased trailblazing director Lois Weber, one of the highest-paid filmmakers of the 1910s. In other words, Universal didn't just make movies, it invented modern movie marketing. Without the Florence Lawrence gambit, you don't get star vehicles, fan mags, or today's A-list brand power. Wild to think it all started with an audacious credit line and a headline-grabbing stunt. Long before Frankenstein or Dracula, Universal was already dabbling in the monstrous Lon Chaney, known as the Man of a Thousand Faces. Chaney starred in The Phantom of the Opera, 1925, shocking audiences with his self-applied grotesque makeup and eerie performance. He transformed his face into nightmares without CGI or fancy prosthetics, just raw ingenuity. Chaney's work basically established Universal as the place for creepy horror and twisted characters. His films were box office hits and showed that there was money in the macabre. Sadly, Chaney died before Universal's big 1930s monster boom, but his influence was everywhere. Directors and makeup artists carried his techniques into the next generation of films. Universal's monster DNA starts right here, with one actor willing to physically suffer for scares. Without Lon Chaney, the studio might have stayed in the shadows. Instead, it leaned into them, turning horror into its trademark. The Great Depression wasn't kind to studios, and Universal was no exception. In 1931, the studio desperately needed a hit. The answer? Monsters. Dracula starring Bela Lugosi and Frankenstein starring Boris Karloff, both released that year, were massive successes. Suddenly, Universal was the house of horror. These films weren't just hits, they redefined what horror could be, mixing gothic style with emotional tragedy. The studio doubled down, creating a monster universe decades before Marvel thought of it. Sequels, spin-offs, crossovers, Universal was pumping them out. Like crazy. Monsters kept the studio alive when audiences had no money for fluff, but plenty of appetite for scares. The imagery, Dracula's cape, Frankenstein's bolts, became instantly iconic. It's no exaggeration to say these two movies saved Universal from going under. Hollywood has plenty of famous monsters, but Universals were the ones that made history and kept the studio alive when times were bleak. Carl Laemmle didn't just build Universal, he stuffed it with relatives. He was so notorious for hiring family that critics called the studio Laemmle's family business. Reports say he had over 70 relatives working there at one time. Nephews, cousins, in-laws, you name it. They had a Universal job. Hollywood insiders mocked him for it, but honestly, it kind of worked. Universal stayed afloat for years on the back of these family connections. The nepotism got so legendary that it's still referenced in film history books. However, it also backfired. Laemmle's son, Carl Jr., eventually took over and made some bold but financially reckless moves. By the mid-1930s, the Laemmle family lost control of Universal after investors forced them out. So yes, Universal started as a family business, but in true Hollywood fashion, money and power struggles eventually kicked the family to the curb. Nepotism built it and ended it. Universal didn't stop with Dracula and Frankenstein. The studio kept cranking out monsters, giving us The Wolfman, 1941, The Mummy, 1932, and later, Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954. These weren't just scary movies, they were full-blown pop culture events. Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman became an icon of the 1940s horror, while Creature gave audiences 3D thrills in the 50s. Universal practically cornered the market on monsters. These films created tropes we still see today: tragic villains, sympathetic beasts, and mad scientists galore. They also made Halloween costumes and monster toys big business. Even when critics rolled their eyes, audiences lined up for chills. Decades later, those monsters keep getting revived and rebooted, proof of their staying power. Marvel might own superheroes, but Universal will always own the monsters. When you think of horror in Hollywood, you're still standing on Universal's spooky shoulders. By the late 1940s, the monster craze was running out of steam. Enter comedy duo Abbott and Costello. In 1948, Universal paired them with Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. It was half horror, half comedy, and it worked like a charm. The movie was a box office smash, breathing new life into both the monsters and Abbott and Costello's careers. What's funny is that the monsters still played it straight. They didn't act silly just because it was a comedy. That contrast made the whole thing even funnier. The film ended up becoming one of Universal's biggest hits of the decade and kept the monster brand alive for another round. It also proved Universal wasn't afraid to mash genres. Today, crossovers are everywhere, but back then, Abbott and Costello meeting Frankenstein was pure genius and way ahead of its time. Universal's history is full of highs and lows, and the 1940s brought one of the biggest lows. After Carl Laemmle's family was forced out, new management struggled to keep the studio profitable. Universal had hits here and there, but by the late 1940s it was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Ownership kept changing hands, with investors selling pieces to whoever could keep the lights on. At one point, Universal merged with smaller companies just to stay alive. The scary part? It nearly vanished completely. Imagine a world without Jurassic Park, or Back to the Future because Universal folded in the 40s. The only thing that kept it going was a steady stream of mid-budget genre films, westerns, monster flicks, comedies that turned enough profit to avoid disaster. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept Universal in the game until the studio could reinvent itself in later decades. Survival was the victory. Which Hollywood studio has the craziest comeback story? Universal, MGM, or Warner Brothers? Let us know in the comments, and smash that subscribe button so you don't miss our next studio deep dive. In the 1960s, Universal scored big by bringing Alfred Hitchcock into the family. By then, Hitchcock was already a legend, but his partnership with Universal elevated both sides. Psycho, 1960, was shot cheaply and partly financed by Hitchcock himself, but Universal distributed it, and it became one of the most influential horror films ever made. Hitchcock also gave Universal The Birds, 1963, and Marnie, 1964, adding prestige to a studio that had been known mostly for monsters and B-movies. Even today, Universal Studios' backlot tram ride highlights Hitchcock's sets, especially the Bates Motel. Hitchcock was the perfect fit, a master of suspense joining the studio that already mastered horror. Together, they made audiences scream, squirm, and cheer, and they cemented Universal's reputation as the studio of shocks and surprises. Without Hitchcock, Universal might not have survived the 60s with its scary reputation intact. Not everything at Universal was monsters and murders. In the 1950s and 60s, Universal turned into a rom-com factory, pairing Doris Day and Rock Hudson for a string of hits like Pillow Talk, 1959, and Lover Come Back, 1961. These glossy, colorful comedies were box office gold and gave Universal a softer, more glamorous side. They also pushed the envelope with innuendo and suggestive humor, sneaking a little spice into otherwise squeaky clean entertainment. Audiences loved the chemistry between Hudson and Day, and the films were so successful that other studios scrambled to copy the formula. For Universal, these rom-coms balanced out its darker monster and thriller output, proving the studio could do laughs and love just as well as screams. If you've ever seen a cheesy romantic comedy today, you can thank Universal for setting the blueprint back when Doris and Rock ruled the screen. Before 1975, summer was considered a graveyard for movies. Studios dumped low-priority films there because audiences were supposedly too busy enjoying the sunshine. Then Steven Spielberg came along with Jaws. Universal took a gamble releasing it in June, and the movie exploded into a phenomenon. Jaws became the first summer blockbuster, dominating the box office all season long. Suddenly, summer was the place to drop your biggest, loudest, most exciting films. Every studio copied Universal's playbook. Without Jaws, we probably wouldn't have Star Wars in May, or today's endless summer superhero marathons. What's funny is that the shark barely worked, so Spielberg had to rely on suspense instead of spectacle. That flaw made it scarier and turned it into history. Universal basically reprogrammed Hollywood's calendar with one malfunctioning mechanical shark. Sometimes the scariest thing in Hollywood isn't a monster, it's a release date gamble. Universal didn't just invent the blockbuster, it also pioneered the raunchy college comedy. In 1978, Animal House cost only $3 million to make, but it raked in over $140 million, becoming one of the most profitable comedies ever. The movie launched John Belushi into superstardom and set the template for every outrageous frat comedy that followed, from Old School to American Pie. At first, Universal executives hated it, worried it was too offensive. But audiences loved the chaotic energy and quotable lines. The film showed Universal was willing to gamble on weird, edgy projects and win big. Even the toga party became a real-life college ritual thanks to this movie. Animal House basically gave permission for comedy to get rude, crude, and loud. Without it, half of modern comedy probably wouldn't exist. It's proof that Universal wasn't afraid to take risks on risky humor. When Back to the Future started filming, Marty McFly wasn't played by Michael J. Fox. It was Eric Stoltz. Universal spent weeks filming with him, but something just wasn't clicking. Stoltz was too serious, lacking the goofy charm the role needed. So, in a risky move, Universal fired him mid-shoot and brought in Fox, who was already busy on Family Ties. Fox juggled TV by day and movie by night, barely sleeping. But the magic worked. Back to the Future became one of Universal's biggest hits ever. Imagine how different it would have been without Fox's energy and timing. Sometimes the boldest studio decision is admitting a mistake and fixing it on the fly. Universal bet big on a recast, and it paid off with a film that remains iconic today. Great Scott, firing your lead actor mid-shoot sounds crazy, but Universal proved it can change destiny. So, be honest, do you think Back to the Future would have worked with Eric Stoltz, or was Michael J. Fox the only possible Marty? Comment your thoughts below, and if you're Team Fox, smash that like button right now. In 1982, Spielberg did it again. E.T. the Extraterrestrial was released by Universal and instantly became a cultural phenomenon. Kids cried, adults cried, and the film made so much money it dethroned Star Wars as the highest-grossing movie of all time. For 11 years, E.T. held the crown until another Universal movie, Jurassic Park, beat it in 1993. What's wild is that Universal almost didn't greenlight E.T. because the pitch sounded too weird. A lonely boy befriends a wrinkly alien with a glowing finger. Not exactly a guaranteed hit. But Spielberg's heartwarming direction turned it into one of the most beloved family films ever. Universal's willingness to roll the dice gave the studio another industry-defining blockbuster. Today, E.T. Phone Home is part of pop culture forever. Sometimes the strangest pitches become the biggest moneymakers, at least when Universal is brave enough to say yes. By the 1980s, Universal's monster movies were decades old, but then came VHS. Universal re-released its classic monster library on home video, complete with cheesy TV specials celebrating the old films. Suddenly, a whole new generation discovered Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. For many kids in the 80s, this was their first taste of black and white horror, and they loved it. Universal basically reinvented its own history, packaging nostalgia as a new product. Well, it worked so well that the monsters became timeless again, leading to toys, costumes, and even theme park attractions. Think of it as Universal rebooting itself without remakes, just by selling the same classics to a new audience. Today, studios make billions off reboots, but Universal showed you could keep your old monsters alive just by putting them on tape. Not bad for movies that were originally made before World War II. By the early 90s, Universal was ready to shock the world again. Jurassic Park, 1993, directed by Spielberg, combined cutting-edge CGI with practical effects to bring dinosaurs to life in ways no one had ever seen. The T-Rex in the rain? Still one of the most jaw-dropping sequences in film history. Universal spent about $63 million making it, and it earned over $1 billion, becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time. But it wasn't just the money. It was the revolution. Every studio suddenly scrambled to catch up with CGI technology. Special effects would never be the same. Universal once again reset the industry, just like it had with Jaws and E.T. The movie didn't just make dinosaurs roar, it made Hollywood realize imagination had caught up with technology. If you were alive in '93, you probably remember leaving the theater thinking dinosaurs were real again. Universal didn't just make movies, it let you ride them. Starting in the 1960s, the studio opened its backlot tram ride to tourists. By the 1980s and 90s, it evolved into a full-blown theme park. Visitors could get attacked by Jaws, travel through time in a Back to the Future ride, or face raptors in Jurassic Park. The idea was genius. Keep audiences connected to Universal's movies long after they left the theater. It also created another steady stream of revenue, making Universal less dependent on unpredictable box office hits. The studio lot became both a workplace and a tourist hotspot, mixing Hollywood history with theme park thrills. Today, Universal Studios parks around the world rake in billions. Carl Laemmle let fans tour movie sets back in 1915, but decades later, Universal turned that idea into a global empire. You don't just watch Universal films, you live them. For all the blockbusters, Universal has also had some seriously dark days. In the late 1990s, the studio's ownership kept changing hands. Seagram, Vivendi, and even General Electric all took turns running the show. With so many corporate overlords, Universal often felt like a business first and a creative powerhouse second. The box office didn't always help either. Big-budget gambles like Babe, Pig in the City, 1998, and Meet Joe Black, 1998, crashed hard, losing millions. The studio seemed unsure of its identity, sometimes chasing prestige dramas, other times trying to copy other studios' hits. Luckily, Universal hung on through the chaos, thanks to steady revenue from its theme parks and a few modest successes. It wasn't pretty, but survival was key. In hindsight, Universal's dark period shows even the biggest studios stumble. What matters is how they bounce back, and Universal was gearing up for a comeback. By the early 2000s, Universal needed a win. Enter The Fast and the Furious 2001. What started as a modest street racing movie with muscle cars and DVD player heists turned into a billion-dollar franchise juggernaut. Over time, it became less about drag races and more about family. And by family, we mean globe-trotting stunts that defy physics. From launching cars into space to dragging safes through Rio, the series pumped out blockbuster after blockbuster, saving Universal's bottom line. It gave the studio something every company dreams of, a reliable, long-running franchise that prints money. Alongside hits like Despicable Me from Illumination, another Universal company, the Fast saga proved Universal could adapt with the times. Today, Vin Diesel and company are as much a part of Universal's identity as Dracula and Jurassic Park. Not bad for a franchise that began with stolen DVD players and a tuna sandwich subplot. Conclusion. And there you have it, 20 wild facts about Universal Pictures. From a German immigrant hustling his way into Hollywood to monsters saving the studio during the Depression, to sharks, aliens, dinosaurs, and Vin Diesel's family obsession, Universal's story is basically the story of Hollywood itself. It's had flops, scandals, and close calls, but somehow it keeps reinventing itself. Universal isn't just about movies, it's about survival, spectacle, and always aiming bigger. Whether it's Dracula in the 1930s, E.T. in the 80s, or Dom Toretto growling about family in the 2000s, Universal has always found a way to leave its mark. So now it's your turn. What's your favorite Universal movie moment? Is it monsters, blockbusters, or maybe just the Back to the Future ride at the theme park? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more dives into the legends of Hollywood.